Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I'm pleased to see that many Zimbabweans are taking the challenge of trying to find a way out for the country with the seriousness and urgency the matter demands. Zimbabwe is a failed state, and we need to dig ourselves out of the hole we landed ourselves in. Here is a discussion between Dr. Simba Makoni and Trevor Nguwe. And I think it raises a number of very interesting points in our search for a way out of the mess we landed ourselves in.
The elections are not going to be the way to resolve our current political crisis. There's a talk of a national transitional authority. There's talk of an all-stakeholder national convergence forum. I think these being an admission that the things that you've highlighted, corruption, violence, toxicity, no value, no compassion, that we basically need to press the reset button. Do you have any views on the NTA and the all-stakeholder convergence platform?
Certainly, elections have not given us the democratic dispensation that we believed the armed struggle and the liberation struggle was bringing for us. Barely a decade into our independence, we were already at each other's throat. ZANU and ZAPU, ZANU and Zoom, ZANU and Forum, now ZANU and MDC. We've never had a normal political environment right from independence. So when you're searching for change, it's justified that when one route has failed, you must look for another route. And because of that, I understand why there are calls for a transitional national authority, there are calls for a national convergence platform, there are calls even for a Sabbath from politics. My take on this is, let's not really focus on, is it 7 years? But the concept is that let's take a break from toxic politics. Let's take a break from adversarial politics. Let's come together and say we have this one country, all of us, and that it is our obligation together to rebuild it.
But that threatens those who are in power.
Unfortunately,
and it
yes.
threatens those who think they will get into power, and there's not going to be patches of that idea. Am I right?
At the surface, yes, Trevor, you're right. But there will come a time when those in power will realize that it's a mirage. It's a figment. That they're in power because they can set soldiers on the people is not being in power. That you hold the chairmanship's office because you bought the voters who came to vote for the chairman is not being in the chair. They must realize that sooner or later. So, yes, I think...
How much hope do you attach to that?
Trevor, for as long as I can still breathe and there's air in my lungs, I live in hope and aspiration that we can make the change that we deserve.
Well, I'll stop it at that. My take on this issue is a simple one. To argue that democracy or elections have not worked is to miss the point completely. Because the first question one is going to ask is, has Zimbabwe ever held free, fair, and credible elections? And the answer to that is going to be no. We have never had free, fair, and credible elections. Our first elections in 1980 were not free, fair, and credible. The Lancaster House parties agreed that both ZANU-PF and PF-SAPO, who had freedom fighters in the field, would withdraw them to allow for campaigning for the 1980 elections. When Mugabe and company got back to Zimbabwe, by the time they got there, they'd already changed their minds. They were not going to withdraw all their operatives from the field. They kept a number of them in the field. And their campaign message was to tell the people of Zimbabwe that if ZANU-PF does not win the elections, the Bush War would continue. So out of the window came the whole concept of free, fair, and credible elections. You can forget it. It was not going to be free, fair, and credible elections. Those were not free, fair, and credible elections. And if people thought by allowing ZANU-PF to win, they'd save themselves from the Bush War, they were wrong. Because 3 years down the line, Mugabe and company launched the infamous Gukurahundi. Gukurahundi was nothing more than a war of domination. ZANU-PF wanted to be the dominant party. They went after PF-SAPO because that was the only other political party in Zimbabwe that posed a serious political challenge to ZANU-PF. And the number one reason for it was to force the late Dr. Joshua Nkomo and his PF-SAPO friends to give up their aspirations as an independent political party and join up with ZANU-PF, which they finally did in 1987 with the signing of the Unity Accord. And that paved the way for Mugabe to impose the de facto one-party state that has ruled the country to this day. Zimbabwe never had free, fair, and credible elections. We never had democracy. So for anyone to turn around and say free elections and democracy do not work in Zimbabwe, how can you say free elections and democracy do not work in Zimbabwe when we've never tried it? What is the solution? Well, the solution is that we should create an environment in which we do have free, fair, and credible elections, and we can then give democracy a chance. I find it ridiculous, some of the suggestions that are being made, that because we failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections, the solution, therefore, is that we should not have elected officials. This is what we have had all along, unelected officials who impose themselves on the nation. And we are in this mess because that has not worked. So to suggest that the solution to the problem is to make it worse. In other words, we have this sabbatical where we won't go into details of how the new government will be formed, how they are to be reconstituted, but there won't be any elections. So we have gone from at least holding elections, although they are not free, fair, and credible, to now thinking that we will dismiss with the whole process of election altogether. It's ridiculous. I think we have got to be honest that we have not had free, fair, and credible elections in Zimbabwe. And so we cannot blame democracy when we've never tried it. And we should be looking at why have we failed to have free, fair, and credible elections. The main reason, of course, 1980, is that we had the misfortune of having founding fathers like Robert Mugabe. We had no commitment to free, fair, and credible elections and the respecting of the individual rights and freedoms. Other nations that had visionary founding fathers, like South Africa with the late Nelson Mandela, they have achieved a democratic society. We didn't have that fortune. We had the opportunity to put that right during the GNU, particularly. But unfortunately, our second bite at the cherry also was a failure. Because the men and women in the MDC were easily corrupted by Mugabe, and they forgot about the reforms. All we need in Zimbabwe is not the leaders, but ourselves, the ordinary people, to realize what we want, to accept that the leaders have let us down, and to articulate what we want. I believe that if the people of Zimbabwe did not participate in the 2023 elections in their millions because they believed Chamisa and his idiotic lies that he had plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes, SADC and the AU election observers who condemned those elections would have given Zimbabwe, would have denied ZANU-PF political legitimacy and forced the regime to accept another GNU. And the people themselves, if we had learned the mistakes of the last GNU, we would have been the ones to say, we want a new GNU and they must implement all the democratic reforms. Just because Morgan Tsvangirai and company failed to implement even one token reform does not mean that there's nobody else out there who can implement the reforms. Nor does it mean we do not need those reforms anymore. We need them. I'll just conclude with playing a short video clip of thinking outside the box, with the emphasis here that we need to think outside the box. And this is something that we have not been doing very well. And the suggestions that are being made here by some people clearly shows that we are not thinking outside the box.
We're trapped in our own patterns. And we are our own worst enemy. Your yesterday's presumptions shape your attitudes today and tomorrow. And that itself limits you. So it was Einstein that said that you cannot solve a problem with the same thought process that was part of creating the problem. Or sometimes there's another variation of it that if you want to change the system, you have to have a solution from outside the system. Because anything within the system is part of the system. Number one, you don't even know if it's changed, maybe just another systematic, another product of the old system. Or or maybe a delusion of real change when you're just deceiving yourself into change. So these principles, which are basic common sense, of course, lend itself to the whole concept of what means thinking out of the box. Is it even possible? If we're defined by a box, and we all have prejudices, just to quote another Einstein quote, that by the time, what he says, common sense are the prejudices that we have developed by the time we're 18 years old. That's what's called common sense, which we so are proud of our common sense. Common sense means it's common, means that it's something that everybody agrees about. Now, that may be very nice for popularity and for not making any waves, but it's not necessarily great for innovation.
I think we need to start thinking outside the box. We can't be repeating the same mistakes over and over again. We cannot blame elections and democracy for Zimbabwe's failure to be a healthy and functioning democracy. Because we never had free and fair elections. And the requirements for free, fair, and credible elections is not rocket science. Why we have failed to achieve it beggars belief. We are the ones who have been participating in flawed elections because we believed somebody like Chamisa that he would deliver, the opposition would win flawed elections, rigged elections. How naive is that? And it's all because we have failed to articulate ourselves what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections. And what we wanted to see in free, fair, and credible elections. I don't believe that it is rocket science. Free, fair, and credible elections are within our reach. Other nations have managed to achieve the same thing, and so can we. We just have to apply ourselves. We cannot keep repeating the same mistakes. 45 years of rigged elections is an outrage in this day and age. All because we have never really sat back and said what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections. And to articulate to those in power that we want free, fair, and credible elections, and will not accept anything else. If we do not participate in 2028 elections because we've been conned by the likes of Chamisa to believe that he's going to win flawed elections, I believe SADC will deny Zanu-PF of political legitimacy and propose a new GNU. And in that new GNU, we can get people who can implement the democratic reforms to ensure free, fair, and credible elections. It is not rocket science. We just need to apply ourselves. I commend Dr. Makoni and Trevor's efforts in trying to get this issue properly resolved. As a nation, we cannot afford this carry-on of participating in flawed elections and then at the end of the day accept that the elections were rigged and we are stuck with the regime. That is what we need to do, and we can do it. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.